Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalrain and I was not sure about putting up this video because there are too many videos that are very generic that ask the question, how do you pick a main in BFA? It's usually people going over what classes they will play and the reasons why. Well, I want to take a stab at it myself to ask and answer a simple question of how to pick a main for BFA. And there's multiple different ways, but I really want to give you guys actual helpful tips in order to help you guys out. BFA is a brand new expansion. There's a lot of class changes going on. Some classes are staying more or less the same, while others are changing in various ways, but the game itself is going to be different regardless. The game is new, so you want to pick a class that you think you'll be able to stick with. You want to pick something you're satisfied with because you're paying 15 bucks a month anyway, so you might as well play what you enjoy. So this video is going to have a lot of tips to help you guys narrow down what class you maybe should engage and play when it comes to BFA. And it's going to have a more linear approach. We're going to start more from a casual perspective, just the simple things, because sometimes the simple things can get us into certain classes we play, and then gradually, slowly upgrade ourselves towards a more serious look at the game. So without further ado, let's actually get into the video of how to pick a class for BFA. Let's first start with the casual approach, the easy one, the class fantasy. And I know everybody talks about the class fantasy, but World of Warcraft got plenty of it. Class fantasy is a thing, and you gotta find a class which appeals to you. What kind of fantasy do you like? And World of Warcraft has built up from 12 different classes for you to choose from. Do you want to be a paladin protecting your allies, judging your foes with holy spells and smite? Do you want to be a rogue, a stealthy assassin, sneaking up and attacking their foes? Do you want to be a druid, being able to adapt many forms to deal with various situations, no matter what it is, be it casting spells, close-up combat, healing wounds, or bear tanking? A lot of classes in the game have a class fantasy. To help you find a character that suits your fantasy, I would suggest making a trial character of every single class. Try them out and try all the different abilities. You might find a warrior's heroic charge into the fray to be something that suits you. Maybe you'll love being a mage to blink out of any type of danger. Maybe you'll want to play a paladin with a bubble. Testing out all the different abilities and find ones that appeal to you. Whether you simply like the look or like the feel, or maybe how those abilities make you feel, can sometimes be enough in order to get people on the right way, on the right track, finding the perfect class for them. Flavor can be something that a lot of people can get into. So if that's enough for you, pick a class whose flavor you enjoy. If you're still watching this video, then chances are you're probably still not convinced. Alright, let's get more practical. Let's actually apply some actual tips into this video past the class fantasy. Let's say you want to take a look at some of the roles, and you really should. What do you want to do in the game? Let's first take a look at the easiest role in the game, but it doesn't have to be the easiest role, depending on what kind of a caliber player you are, the DPS role. With DPS, all you generally have to do is dish out as much damage as possible. You also don't have quite the same responsibility of a healer or a tank. Let's say you choose to become a DPS. What kind of a DPS do you want to be? Do you want to be a ranged DPS, casting abilities from a safety, but as soon as things cause you to move, you really lose most of your damage? Or do you want to be a melee DPS, where sometimes you have to get really up close and personal to the enemy, which means you might be running around a lot, but most of your abilities are insta-cast, allowing you to use them as soon as you get in there. So one has more dangerous playstyle, the other has more of a safe, mobility-heavy playstyle. Maybe you want to be a ranged DPS without mobility really suppressing you, so maybe as little of casting as possible. Beastmaster Hunters might be the class for you. Maybe you want to play something between a melee and a ranged, maybe a melee with some hybrid abilities where you can get some range on the enemy without losing too much DPS. Classes like Shaman, Survival, as well as Unholy Death Knight have a few talents that will allow you to do damage from distance without losing the majority of your DPS. Maybe you want to stick to melee. What kind of melee do you want to be? Do you want to be a melee with a lot of cleave and AoE, or do you want to be a melee with a lot of strong single target damage? Do you want to be more sustained based? Do you want to be more bursty? Do you want to be more about crowd control or less about crowd control? A lot of these things will determine what kind of gameplay you will end up having inside of a raid, inside of a dungeon, inside of a PvP group, and determine what kind of a playstyle do you want for yourself. Alright, maybe damage dealing is not for you. Maybe you want to be the leader of the group. Tanks hold the group together. You're the guy drawing all the aggro, making sure you take the most amount of damage, trying to reduce it as best as possible, while the rest of the DPS go wailing on the boss. Maybe you're somebody who likes having a little bit more responsibility. Maybe you like having responsibility as a tank or as a healer, because a healer will be really just there to support their group. Tanks and healers also have a capability to get into random dungeons as well as raids a little bit easier than DPS. There's a lot of damage dealers, you have a lot of competition, but when it comes to reliable tanks and reliable healers, if you get really good at what you're doing, then you can really get the most out of that class. You can really get the most out of that experience and get into groups a little bit easier if you're somebody who is willing to take on the extra responsibility. So this is where you want to take a look at some classes and look at what roles they can play. Some classes can play more than one role. They want to maybe have a little bit more DPS heavy approach and single target, mostly in melee range, but you also want to be able to queue as a tank from time to time. Death Knights, Warriors, Paladins, Monks, all these classes are great to have a class that's a melee DPS, but you can always queue as a tank whenever you need your daily dungeon or maybe want to do some LFR raiding. You want to be a class with a lot of adaptability, maybe Druid or a Shaman. Those classes might be the best as they have more than one DPS role, or even Priest who has 2 healing roles in their spec. So on these parameters alone, a lot of people can narrow down the decision of what they want out of the game, and it's completely fine if you want to focus on a pure DPS class. Classes like Mages, Hunters, Warlocks, and Rogues are purely DPS, and those classes usually end up dealing a good chunk of damage. Just know that you're probably going to be competing against other people of same class, but if you want to limit yourself to what roles, it's fine. They just gotta be the best of those. If you want to have more flexibility, you can, but how much flexibility do you want it? What kind of gameplay you want it? And if you're not sure, I feel like you should play a Druid, as it has 4 different specs that it's really difficult to pick from. Now, if you're still watching this video and you're still not convinced about which class you should play, still unsure, then let me give you this advice. Maybe you're somebody who wants to take the game a little bit seriously. Maybe you're somebody who wants to get into some serious raiding. Maybe even mythic raiding, mythic plus dungeons, or maybe you want to go in PvP and maybe finally reach the gladiator title, which is all exciting, but that means you'll probably be playing the game very seriously. So if you're somebody who wants to play the game seriously, probably the best advice for you would be to find a class where all the specs, and I do mean all of the specs, of that class you really wouldn't mind playing. You know, usually in previous expansions, classes didn't really matter that much, but especially in BFA, they adopted a new mantra. Bring the class, not the player mentality. Just about every class in the game should be good, and I really mean class. You see, if you learn one spec, that means you're locked out to that one spec, but if you learn all 3 specs, or 4 or 2, depending on the class which you play, then you're a pretty proficient player. Let's say you're playing as a Druid, and Druid tanks are the best. Everybody wants a bear Druid. If you're somebody who can learn bear, restoration, feral, and boomy, and be fairly proficient with them, maybe have enchants for them and best Azeroth pieces of gear, and understand and know these specs, then there shouldn't be any reason why people wouldn't want to bring you. And this especially applies to anybody who wants to play a primarily DPS spec, as healers and tanks will have some leeway. See, if you're playing, let's say, a Warlock, and one of those specs becomes super powerful, like let's say Affliction is the best spec. Destruction and Demo might be the specs you prefer playing, but if you don't mind playing Affliction, and you don't mind playing Affliction in RBG groups, in raids, and in Mythic Plus dungeons, and you really have nothing against the spec, well then most people will end up bringing you. If you do find a class, and let's say you like 2 of the specs, but you really just hate the playstyle of the third, and let's say that third playstyle that you hate ends up being the dominant one, yeah, I don't know how many people will want to bring you if you're not going to end up playing that spec. A lot of people have a hard time finding groups, and sometimes you have to play the right spec, whether it's a flavor of the month DPS, or the strongest tank, the strongest healer in the game at the time, because it's usually some strongest to least strongest order at one point or another in the game. Generally, you should be able to bring any class you want, but being able to adapt and adjust to the spec of your class will guarantee that your class will at least get brought into the game. If you're somebody who is going to go for a specific spec, like let's say you just love the idea of a Fury Warrior, you want to be this Berserker Orc, Magha Orc, swinging around these large axes, wearing bone armor all over the place, and all you want to do is play Fury, well, let me tell you, you can, if you really want to. It's going to be a little bit hard, you will have to put a little bit extra time into it, but as somebody who made Outlaw the whole of Legion, making Outlaw opened some doors for me and closed others. Mostly when it comes to closed-minded people that see an Outlaw Rogue and they say, oh, that must be a terrible spec, yeah, I'm not playing with you. So don't let this stuff bother you if you decide to stick to one spec in particular, a spec whose fantasy and playstyle you absolutely love and you would just won't give it up for any reason. It's your favorite spec, so why not? What you're doing is you are limiting yourself by playing that one spec in particular, in some cases, but you're also specializing yourself in particular things that that spec is good at. For example, let's say Fury. It's not quite a caster, can't really hit enemies at range, you can't really tank a boss, and unless you got first aid, you can't really heal anybody, but you got insanely good AoE burst. And I'm pretty sure there are places where people would love to take you, be it a specific arena comp, maybe a specific Mythic Plus comp, or a raid group looking for a mass AoE Fury warrior. Those people out there exist, but you just have to be a little bit more patient. It's a give and take system, but it never stopped me from being able to get where I'm at. So if it never stopped me, with a little bit of effort, it might not stop you. So you can play whatever your favorite spec is without having to give it up altogether. Anyway, if by this point you still haven't figured out a class, whether it be by fantasy, whether it be by roles that you want to play, whether it be by 3 specs that you really wouldn't mind playing, or having one particular spec you would really just want to invest all your time into, if you still haven't figured out a class for World of Warcraft, then don't worry, because pre-patch isn't here yet. Once pre-patch is here, I would definitely recommend for a lot of you guys to at least try all the different classes, see what plays good, see what feels good, and then try to use the tips in this video in order to help you figure out your favorite spec, your favorite class, and the one that you're going to stick for in BFA. And don't worry about having to stick to one spec, and in case it doesn't work out a couple patches from here, it's always good to level a couple alts, because you never know, there might be a few changes that might change the spec in a wrong direction that you never liked. Having some alts leveled on the side is always going to be a good way for you to have a backup, and it's pretty easy to get yourself caught up as raid tiers, as dungeon tiers, and as PvP seasons come out, because there'll be catch-up mechanics for you to catch up, and you can actually main different classes every raid tier if you wanted to, if you put your mind to it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully it helps you figure out what class you might want to end up playing in BFA. If you guys enjoy videos like these, go ahead and hit subscribe as well as like. If you are gonna hit subscribe button, you might as well hit the notification button, because on YouTube, hitting subscribe button doesn't mean anything. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hopefully you find this video helpful. Let me know if there's a class that's on your mind that you might be thinking about maining in BFA, although I wouldn't make a call up until pre-patch finally arrives. Thank you guys. I'll see all of you in the next one.